And I didn't honestly know that much about menopause. Like I really thought it was like when you're 50, you just stopped having your period and that was it. And once I started doing research and learning more about it and talking to my friends, I'm like, we're all in the same boat. Like it is coming or it is here and we do not know anything about it. And
Yeah.
so I shifted my focus really to support women throughout the menopause continuum, like with perimenopause, menopause, and like even postmenopause, because it's like very important. And there's also like a huge mindset shift because like things change, like your
Yeah.
body changes, your mood might change. And you really need to understand like the best ways to support yourself through it because it can
Yeah.
be a doozy.
And we were just chit-chatting. It is weird to kind of have like another Renee that you're talking to. It's not a very common name, number one.
It's
So
not.
whenever I hear it, like I'm like, oh, there's Renee. And I work in the NICU part-time. Our manager, her name is Renee. And so people will be like, hey, Renee. And it's always like I peak up. Whereas I think like a Jennifer or Rachel or somebody that's a little bit more common probably doesn't peak up
Exactly.
quite as much, but you're a little bit unique when you have somebody with your exact same name. But
I know it's cool because you don't really run into that many Renees.
no,
So
a lot of Renee middle names, but not Renee first names.
exactly.
Yeah. So, well, I'm excited to have you here. And it's ironic that we both kind of work in this women's health space and helping women kind of really reconnect with their bodies and learn more about their bodies and understand their bodies. And you are in this space of really helping women navigate through perimenopause and into menopause and like what that looks like, how we can do that. Like kind of, so today we're just going to like remove some of the veil and the stigma and the mindset that maybe women have around their going through changes in their body as they age and things like that. So I'm so excited to have you here and have this conversation.
Well, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your story and your journey. Like, how is this something that has become something that you feel so passionate about?
Well, partly due to age, but it was like it was a series of a lot of events that led me here. So 4 years ago now, prior to my work as a health coach, I'm a holistic health coach. I worked in a therapeutic school as a behavior specialist. So I worked with adolescents, like helping them manage their behaviors. It was something that I had done for like 15 plus years. And I was laid off during COVID. And one of the things that like my friends and colleagues always wanted to know was like how I was able to create like health habits, like how it just seemed like effortless what I did in terms of like just like maintaining all the things that people struggle with, like in terms of finding a balance with movement and like eating a more balanced diet and all of that stuff. So I was like, you know what? I am going to move my focus there because I felt that was lacking in the health and nutrition space. Like there's a lot of talk about sustainable nutrition and health habits, but like not many people qualify to help people actually make those changes in a truly sustainable way based on like behavioral psychology. And then like right when I started my career change, like I started noticing that some things were changing within me. And it was ironic because in the beginning, like my whole premise was like, I have been able to maintain my weight for like 10 years, like with these health habits. And legit, like as soon as I started, it was like, or not. So I needed to figure out like what was going on with me. Like I'm older, like I'm turning 52 on next week. And so this was like around age 47. And I was like, okay, like obviously like, and I didn't honestly know that much about menopause. Like I really thought it was like when you're 50, you just stopped having your period and that was it. And once I started doing research and learning more about it and talking to my friends, I'm like, we're all in the same boat. Like it is coming or it is here and we do not know anything about it. And so I shifted my focus really to support women throughout the menopause continuum, like with perimenopause, menopause, and like even postmenopause, because it's like very important. And there's also like a huge mindset shift because like things change, like your body changes, your mood might change. And you really need to understand like the best ways to support yourself through it because it can be a doozy.
Yeah, for sure. I kind of liken it to almost like pregnancy or, you know, other things, like you really don't know what you don't know until
Yep.
you get there,
Yeah,
right? Like
exactly.
you can think you're prepared, you can think you know what's coming, and then you're like, oh crap, like nobody told me about this. Like I was not expecting this.
Exactly. It's kind of like puberty, right? It's like,
Yeah.
it's coming. And I mean, I have a teenage daughter. It's like I prepared her as much as possible, but it's so different for every adolescent, like going through puberty. Like some people go through it, like they don't even really notice it. Like some people, it's like
Yeah.
more difficult. And it's the same with menopause. It's like you don't know what you don't know until you're there. And I
Yeah.
think now looking back, playing detective, I'm like, okay, like obviously, like I was having signs that things were changing like earlier. I just was
Mm.
unaware
Yeah.
that things were
Okay.
happening.
Yeah, totally. So when I got pregnant and was getting ready to go into labor with my daughter, my first daughter, I had a friend of mine say, okay, this is what you need. You need these Tux pads. You need to have ice packs in the freezer. You need to have all, like, she came and she like told me the things that no one else really talked about. Like everybody talks about, preparing for labor and then this beautiful baby afterwards, but
Yep.
nobody really talks about the nitty gritty of like, everything from your vagina down feels like it's going to fall out and it's on fire and it's like all these things, right? So nobody ever talks about those
Right.
things. And
Exactly.
yet those were in the moment you're like, that's when I need the help. And like, it's almost too late to ask for the help when you're in that moment, right? So
Correct.
what are those things that you wish somebody had told you that we could tell somebody else that hasn't gone there yet? Like those things that like nobody's talking about.
First, I would say is like start being aware of like how you are like at the end of your 30s, the beginning of your 40s, because like that's
Mm,
for most of us like the beginning of like perimenopausal transition. So, and just like be aware, like
yeah.
do you notice like changes like with your appetite? Like, are you noticing changes in your mood? And also like know that like, yes, it could be due to situations going on around you, like your situational, like your life, but it could also be due
Mm,
to other things, and just start to write it down. I mean, the trickiest thing about perimenopause is like our reproductive hormones, like it affects us differently.
yeah.
So the way it will affect me, it will be different than the way it affects you. So you really have to learn to be aware of what's going on in your body and like be an advocate for
Mm,
yourself. And so with
mhm.
most people, I think what it's funny that you asked, because a friend was texting me the other day and she's like, oh my gosh, I think I'm starting to go through it. Like my periods are longer. Like if you're not on birth control, like noticing like any changes in like the length of your periods or even like the time between your periods is like the first sign. And it might not be like every month, because I think that's
Mhm.
another thing that we think like, oh, once it starts, it's going to fluctuate. Your hormones are fluctuating daily. So each monthly period will look different. And so that's like one thing that I wish I knew, because I had my daughter later in life and then we were trying to conceive again. And like a lot of things I attributed to maybe like having multiple miscarriages. It probably was just like my cycle being off, like
Mm,
because I was starting perimenopause. Changes
mhm.
in sleep. Like if you're noticing that like you're just not really sleeping as well as you were previously, that's like a telltale sign that it's coming. And like if you do other things, like if you drink and you notice that your tolerance for alcohol has changed, again, a
Mhm.
sign that things are different. So really be mindful of like what's going on. And if you are into journaling, start like journaling that, because like that
Mhm.
will be helpful for you as well, and to start tracking things. I would also say in my 40s, like what I wish I knew as well in terms of like behaviors would be like how to support my body. So really making sure that I'm
Mm,
eating enough protein, at least getting like a palm, 1 to 2 palm sizes of protein at every meal. Definitely moving away from like just wanting to shrink my body like all the time, because I know
mhm.
that that did more damage like earlier on in terms of like losing muscle mass. And if you're not strength training, like figuring out a way to get to incorporate it into your life at least 1 to 2 times a week as a start, because we start also losing muscle mass as we age. And so with the loss of muscle mass, like it does change some things with body composition. So
Mm.
In my early 40s, what I wish I did differently was eat more
Yeah.
protein. Like, and definitely, I mean, I was strength training, but really understanding like the benefits of like what I'm doing for the long term and like how it's helping me maintain muscle. And also like really looking too at the ways that I manage my stress and
Mm.
really getting serious about like finding ways that to manage stress that are health promoting and
Mm-hmm.
trying different things to help me find something that works.
Yeah, this is so good. And I think it just comes back to like, I mean, so much of what I teach and do is helping women learn to trust their bodies. And at the core of it, like a lot of times people come to me and they're like, well, what do I do when my cycle's in this spot? And what do I do when my
Mm-hmm.
cycle's over here? And what if when things go erratic? And what if life happens and all these things? And it ultimately all comes back to how do you learn to listen to your body? Like, how do you learn to listen and trust it? No matter where it ends up, no matter if you're pregnant or menopausal or whatever. And so I know a lot of people come to me thinking like, I'm just going to teach them how to use their cycle. But ultimately, at the core of it, what I teach people is how to actually learn and listen to trust the language of your body and like learning to listen to yourself. And I think that that carries you no matter what phase you're in. It's like exactly the same things you're talking about in terms of like learning to listen to what your body needs and like giving it what it needs and understanding that what you're doing right now is not just for today, it's for your today and your tomorrow and your 10 years down the road and forever forward. And I remember I was in a course, I can't even remember. It was a physical therapy, like, I don't even remember. It was like I don't know what the course was, but I remember the instructor saying, if you could tell your patients to get down on the floor and get up every single day, then when they're 80, 90 years old, they're going to reduce their fall risk so significantly because of that repetition and practice of like the strength it takes and the balance it takes and the
Mm-hmm.
coordination it takes, and how that stuck in my mind so much. And so, like for me, with my parents are still pretty young and active. My husband's parents are getting a little bit older, but I've like reiterated that. And my grandparents, like, if you can get down on the floor and get back up every single day, just start it when you're limber, start it when you're
Mm-hmm.
mobile, start it when you're flexible, then you maintain that over time. It's kind of the same thing that you're talking about too, is like, it was like a weird tangent that I just went on with that, but like, start the strength training, start the movement, start the habits, start these things when you feel good or when your body's moving and your body feels okay. That's going to create this longevity for you, rather than waiting till it's too late. And then you're like, it's never too late, but like waiting till this point where it's like, oh, now it hurts to do it. Or now I have to really push and now I have to work extra hard. Like just
Right.
starting when it's easier in the beginning. I mean, really, we should be doing it. Like I'm trying to get my 13-year-old to like get into a movement habit and pattern that she's going to can carry with her, because I know that it's like that just helps promote your mobility and your flexibility in your body your entire life, not
Ex-
just like,
exactly.
yeah.
And what I find too is like a lot of women spend like between their 30s and like mid 40s, early 50s, like putting their life on hold, like putting all those things on hold because like
Mm,
they're raising kids. And
yeah.
I work with a lot of women in coaching, and it's so much harder to just start. Like it's not
Mhm.
impossible, but like
Mhm.
when you're like 49, 48, whatever, because like you have like all of these associations that you've paired, like, and quite frankly, you're like sabotaging yourself. Like, oh, I
Yeah.
can't walk. If I walk, I have to walk the dogs, and the dogs walk so slow and I don't like it. So therefore I'm not walking. It's like, well, okay, let's break this down. But like some movement is better than no movement. And so, yeah, it's like if you practice starting to build whatever you can now, and it doesn't need to be like this routine, like it's like do the best you can with the time you have available to you.
Yeah.
And that's like one of the greatest things I preach. Like if you don't want to strength train for an hour or you don't have an hour to strength train, that's fine. But even if you do like 15 minutes of like body weight squats, if that's where you're starting, like every other day, you have like this
Mhm.
little 15-minute routine. It's like that's a great starting point, right?
Yeah.
Put that money in the bank. So when you have more time, you may want to do more. But and if you don't, like that's still better than not doing anything at all. And so really moving from an all or nothing to an all or not all or something, but like a something mentality. It's like there's always something that you can do. And what else I noticed too is that like after we hit 50, like people then start worrying about like their family health history. And like that's why clients start coming to me like, oh, I know that I have these issues due to my family health history. Like I want to mitigate those. And then it's again, start when you're like late 30s, early 40s. Yeah. And it's honestly the basics that sound so boring because they are. They're not complicated. They're not sexy, but like they're going to help you like through menopause and beyond. They really are.
Yeah. Okay. So I know I asked the question of like, what do you wish somebody had told you then, right? If you were to like meet with somebody who is in that 30 to 40 year range, right now, and you were to give her like 3 actions to take that are going to help support her journey other than like movement we just talked about and stuff, like what are those 3 actions that she needs to know now?
Well, first I would say, because again, you do not know like how your body's going to respond. So would be to go to like the North American Menopause Society and look for an OBGYN that is well-versed in like the menopause continuum, because like doctors like our OBGYNs, they're not all current with like the latest treatments and like best practices. So that would be like the first thing. So just having someone in your corner from the beginning that you know that you can like talk to, who's a trusted source, would be like one of the first things. Again, like I get really stressing like the nutrition, like just be honest like with your nutrition and work on like the quality of like your food. Like if you're not eating like the highest quality foods, and I don't even mean organic versus not organic, like just trying to eat as many whole foods as possible. Like that's a really helpful thing for people to do. And then again, and sleep and stress are also so important. And granted, like you might not be able to get like 7 hours of sleep, but really like try to curate your life to get like the best quality sleep that you can, and find time to take care of yourself, because I'm going to change sleep and stress. It's all intertwined, but really finding some time to take care of yourself every day, again, is like teaching you how to care for yourself, working through like whatever feelings you might have of not being able to like care for your children in this time. And I don't mean like a long period of time. It could be like 10 minutes a day, but just getting used to having a bubble of time for yourself will be huge.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think that those are all habits that will be beneficial for people now and long-term. And man, like the sun is like coming in my face. I feel like I'm like glowing right now.
You are.
Like,
I was like, you have really good skin.
And I even like pulled the blinds, but like the way the sun's coming up or something, I'm like, ah. I'm like, it's distracting me right now.
No, I was just thinking, wow, she has great skin.
Well, good. Cause I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like glowing like the white balance on my face. But anyway, what's one of the common like misbeliefs or myths or things that you see happening a lot with women that around menopause? Like women tend to think of menopause like this, and you're like, no, it's not that way. Let's go over here. What would you say one of those big things is?
Again, I think the biggest myth is that it happens when you're 50. I mean, which technically it does. Like the average age of like being 1 year without a period is around 51, 52. So that is true. But I do think that people feel like the symptoms start around then too, and they don't. Like they can start like 5 to 7 years before your last period. Another myth is that you can test to see where you are like in your menopause journey. And it's like similar to puberty, you can't. Like if you're between like 40 and 50 years old and your periods start becoming infrequent, like there really isn't a test to see when you'll have your last period. So it's just kind of like, it's one of those things. If you're younger, then there could be other medical conditions going on. And yes, like go to your doctor. But if you're between the age of like 40 and 50, it is what it is. And another thing is that the belief that like it's only hot flashes. And again, that's not true. Like some women, and they're called hot flushes because like they don't really just like flash come like I guess, like I'm like afraid to say this, like a knock on wood, like I don't necessarily experience them, but like it's more like a lingering, it like builds up over time and then you're like really hot and then you cool down. But like there can be like so many other symptoms. Like, and I think that's what is hard too, because your symptoms can be like almost like anything, like it could
Yeah.
be like tinnitus, it could be like increased anxiety. There are so many different ways that it can manifest, like the changing hormone levels can manifest in your body. And so to know that it's more than hot flashes, because I really thought like it was like, okay, I was going to turn like 50 something and I would just be really hot all the time. And that was it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's just not a lot of conversation around it. Like a lot of women don't even really know. And then they start talking about it, like with their friends, and then they start kind of researching and then they go down this road. And it's like there just isn't a lot of conversation around it. And I mean, historically, just women have not felt supported with
Right.
it in general. Like it's just not something that's there. So this is a theory that I have, and I'm kind of curious to get your take on it. So, for me, what I've noticed is that 100% I believe women were made to live cyclically. I think all humans were. It's just a matter of like what the sex cycle looks like and what it is. So, men function more in that cycle of the 24-hour rhythm, and women are in this monthly cycle. And what I have found over and over and over again is that women feel more balanced. They feel more sane. They feel more like at ease. Like so much of their life feels so much better when they live into this 28-day rhythm or monthly rhythm instead of the 24-hour rhythm. And what I've also noticed is that by doing that, it helps support the body's natural rhythm with their cycle. And so it adds to like whether it be the like nutritional or exercise or directly hormonal or whatever, but what happens is that it helps women regulate their hormones, become more regulated, right? Instead of like cortisol being stressed out all the time and like working against their body is like, oh, this is how we're supposed to function. And that most women tend to see more regular periods, things get a little bit easier, things a little bit lighter, like the mood swings and the triggers aren't quite so extreme. Like there's so much, like their body just like breathes a sigh of relief, like, this is how I was meant to be. Now, I have a theory that as women transition through perimenopause and into menopause, if they continue to follow that same monthly rhythm, even if their hormones and their cycle is not necessarily matching up with that, because it's going to happen, right? Like your body is naturally trying to transition out of having that monthly rhythm. I still believe whether it's following the moon or following like your own monthly schedule of like still living your habits in that cyclical rhythm would help ease and mitigate some of the hormonal shifts and changes that are happening during that phase. Like it's almost like you've programmed your body. If you're like cycle syncing and you're using your cycle all along, you're like telling your body like this is the rhythm it's on. And then even when things are kind of awry, we're still in that same rhythm. We're like are telling our bodies like, hey, continue with the same rhythm. And so my theory, and I don't have enough clients that have navigated through it, but that women that use the moon or use some sort of cycle syncing methodology in that same way as they navigate through perimenopause could see that the massive shifts and extremes of their hormones mitigated and that things would be a little bit mellower. Like I said, it's like my theory, but I'm curious to think what your thoughts on that would be.
I think it's an interesting theory. I think it's so hard because with the hormone fluctuations are so different than they are like when your cycle is more regular, that it would be difficult to say, because like all of like the mood changes and everything and symptoms are just due to like estrogen and progesterone, like just doing their things. And so I think even if you're doing everything like you used to do, your body is still going to react internally to what's going on. And in fact, like the difficulty with the symptoms or the severity of the symptoms are related to like the fluctuation of the hormone. So I don't necessarily know if like doing everything the same way, like, I don't know, like it's like an interesting theory. And I also feel like because like cycle syncing is a bit newer, that like you definitely have to be tested out with people who have been doing it. Whereas currently it's like, I'm not even generation. Like my generation, I
Mm-mm.
guess, like people within my age group, like that's not something that we did, right? So
Yeah.
it would be historically for the most part. So it would be like,
Yeah.
it would be tested out with people who are a little bit younger, but based on like everything that I read and like the research, it just suggests that like that would not necessarily be like as helpful just because like it's what's going on internally. It might
Yeah.
make the person feel better because like they're feeling like, okay, they're more in control. And not to say that like things that like we can't, there isn't anything that we can do, right? Like I'm not trying to
Mm-hmm.
say that either.
Mm-hmm.
I think like as much like structure that you can have in your life for anything is like the better outcome you'll have, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like you
Mm-hmm.
know what to expect. But like when things do pop up, I think it's like good to have a plan for that. So for
Mm-hmm.
example, like if you realize that like you are starting to get like hot flushes, like ask yourself like what are you eating? Like is there something that you're eating that's like triggering that? Like or
Mm-hmm.
drinking because for some
Mm-hmm.
people like spicy foods can trigger it, like drinking can trigger it. Like look at those things first and like try to problem solve that way, and that would probably like lead to more balance looking at the triggers of something. So I don't know. I
Yeah,
guess we'll have
no,
to like
I
wait
mean, I
and
guess
see.
like, so my theory is
Hmm.
that our habits are creating the rhythm of the hormones.
Yep.
So like there's a normal progression that our hormones do,
Yep.
but the hormones are definitely showing up differently based on the habits that we have. That's
Yep.
why I think some women have extremely painful periods. Some people have extremely wild hormonal shifts. It is a internal thing that's
Hmm.
happening internal, but that internal status is happening because of direct external inputs on that.
Hmm.
And so when we adjust those external inputs, it actually changes the internal state. So like our hormones do function differently. Like when we look at the cortisol like cascade of like living out of alignment with that body and
Hmm.
that cortisol trigger, it changes all of the other hormones.
Yep.
So yes, somebody's having like really erratic mood swings and they're having really erratic periods and they're having all of these different symptoms, and there are like an internal state that's happening because of the hormone levels. But those internal state can directly be impacted and changed based on the external cues. So
Yep.
I think that's kind of like, that was my theory in philosophy, is like, yeah, going through menopause, it is an internal state and there is an internal
Hmm.
adjustment. But a lot of that can be impacted by those external cues too, and help mitigate it and changed based on those external like impacts that we're creating, if that makes sense.
Right. And yes, and it goes back to like what we were saying earlier about like doing all of the things you can in the beginning, like to
Mm-hmm.
provide the best outcome. Doesn't mean that you won't have it. You know what I mean? Like I know people who do live very healthy lifestyles. I feel like I need to do this as a disclaimer, and they've still had symptoms, right? Like
Yeah.
doesn't mean that you won't have symptoms, but I think it increases the likelihood that your symptoms will be less severe. Even if they are severe,
Mm-hmm.
they'll be less severe than if you weren't impacting, like if you didn't have healthy lifestyle habits.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, because I think about like, for example, like feeling increased anxiety. Like if you are living in a way that you're managing your stress, like through like health promoting behaviors, like yes, you can have increased anxiety. Will that be
Mm-hmm.
better than like if you did things like drinking and staying up late and doing all of these things? Your anxiety will be worse than like if
Mm-hmm.
you didn't do those things. So it's like really being honest too, because I think what happens is that we tend to fall back on like what soothes us. And our brain
Mm-hmm.
is like, we're feeling discomfort. We want automatic relief. And our brain doesn't really look towards like the long term like effects of what we do. So it's like
Yeah.
immediate gratification. Like I'm feeling discomfort. I want to alleviate it immediately. And so that's
Yeah.
why we go to these things that don't really serve us. And then we end up feeling like, oh, was that the best choice? And so
Mm-hmm.
that's why I'm saying like in your late 30s, early 40s, like really finding things that you enjoy that are health promoting so
Mm-hmm.
that you already have like those reps under your belt. And then when you're
Mm-hmm.
feeling stressed out, like later in
Yeah.
life, you can try those health promoting things because you're like, okay, I
Yeah.
know this works.
Yeah, you have that repetition already built in.
Yeah.
This is amazing. And I appreciate you so much for coming on and sharing with us and having this conversation with us. I know, like, women's health stuff is an area that needs more conversation just in general. I think I've seen that, like, there's not a lot of research either.
Yep.
So, like, what knowledge and information we have out there is very limited research. So, there definitely needs to be more research and more advocating and more support. And I think we're trending that way, but it really does come from people being informed and understanding what's happening so that they can make those advocating choices for themselves and speak up and, like, demand more studies and demand more research and all those types of things. So if somebody wants to get in touch with you, learn more about what you've going on in the world and things like that, how can they find you?
Find me. I'm mostly on Instagram at Coach Renee Bellinger. And also, like, you can go to my website still, like www.coachreneebellinger.com, and like join my email list. Like, those are like the places that I'm the most active.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on today and sharing. This was amazing. And I, like we said at the beginning, like before people got on, I was like, my intention is for people to walk away with feeling like there is some positivity, some hope, some, like, that we don't have to just be like a victim to this thing that's happening to us, that we actually have some choice in how we navigate through it and, like, what we do and how we show up for it and things like that. So I appreciate you being willing and able to come on and kind of share some of that with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Alrighty, friend. It was such a pleasure to hang out with you today on today's episode. I cannot wait to do it again with you next week, so save the date. We'll meet here again. Until then, if you haven't already, be sure to leave a review on the podcast, letting us know what you love about this podcast. After you do that, submit a screenshot of that to support@reneefieck.com, and you will be entered in to be able to have one of our free spots inside of Your Cycle 101, our foundational program, letting you know the ins and the outs of how your cycle impacts you every single day. Alrighty, friend, I will see you next week.